At a small-town hospital, a white surgeon discovers a black newborn abandoned at the emergency room door. Without a moment's hesitation, he raises the child as his own. The boy grows up surrounded by his father's love, yet he can never fully escape the weight of the deep-rooted prejudice that lingers in the town. They mock him, they keep their distance, but when danger strikes, he still chooses to help heal them. From that moment on, the town's perspective changed forever, and so did the lives of the father and son. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The fluorescent lights of St. Haven Hospital buzzed faintly above as Dr. Adrian Calloway stepped out through the side entrance near the emergency wing. It was past midnight, and the town of Millbrook, small, quiet, and tightly wound with old traditions, lay still under a blanket of spring fog. Adrian's steps were slow, deliberate. His scrubs clung to him with sweat and fatigue after a 14-hour surgery marathon. He reached into the pocket of his coat for his keys, ready to head home to his empty house and silence, when a soft, broken cry sliced through the stillness. He froze. It wasn't a cat, it wasn't the wind. That was a baby. A baby crying. His breath caught as instinct took over. He followed the sound, each step crunching on gravel under the low hum of the hospital's outside lights. The cries led him around the corner to a narrow strip between the ambulance bay and a dumpster, and there, lying between two old cardboard boxes and wrapped in nothing but a worn-out floral blanket, was a tiny infant, no more than a few days old. Adrian's heart stuttered. He crouched down, hands trembling not from exhaustion but disbelief. The baby's skin was a rich brown, the curls on his small head tight and damp from the night air. He was crying, but not screaming, just the kind of sound that spoke of hunger and confusion, of cold and abandonment. Carefully, gently, Adrian gathered him up into his arms, pressing the small body against his chest. The cries quieted almost instantly. The baby's eyes, dark, alert, and impossibly deep, looked up at Adrian like he already knew him, like he was waiting. Adrian swallowed hard. "Hey there, little guy," he whispered, voice cracking. "Who left you out here, huh?" His hand cradled the back of the baby's head instinctively, his thumb brushing against soft curls. In that exact moment, Adrian felt something he hadn't in years. Not pity, not shock, but purpose. It was like a missing piece inside of him snapped into place, and it scared him. Without thinking twice, Adrian turned on his heel and carried the baby back into the hospital. The nurses on night shift blinked in surprise as he burst into the intake area. "I found him outside," he said, his voice firmer now. "We need to get him checked immediately." Orders flew, tests were run, social services were called. Adrian paced the hallway, unable to sit, his hands shoved into his coat pockets, his mind racing, not with medical questions but with something deeper. His house, his life, the silence of it, the rooms that once had laughter but now echoed with nothing but work and routine. He thought about the years he'd poured into his career, the life he had built on responsibility and control, and how none of that meant anything looking at that child. Hours passed. The baby, though underweight, was healthy. No one had come to claim him. No calls, no missing reports. Just a little boy left in the dark. A woman from Child Protective Services arrived just after dawn. She introduced herself as Clara Monroe. Her tone was professional, but her eyes were kind. "If no one steps forward in the next 24 hours, she explained, "he'll be entered into the foster system. A temporary placement, likely out of county." Adrian stared at the sleeping baby through the glass of the nursery, his fingers pressed against the window. "He doesn't even have a name?" he asked quietly. Clara shook her head. "Not yet. We called him Baby Boy Doe for the chart." Adrian turned to her then, his voice low but steady. "I want to take him in." She blinked, taken aback. "Dr. Calloway, are you sure? This is a serious commitment. You're single, you're a surgeon, and this is Millbrook. It's not always the easiest place to be." "Different?" Adrian nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the baby's peaceful chest rising and falling. "I'm sure. He was left alone in the cold, but he's not alone anymore. I've got space, I've got time, and I've got more love to give than I ever thought I'd need." Clara studied him for a moment, then reached into her bag for the preliminary paperwork. All right then, you'll be placed as an emergency foster. Full adoption will take time. Are you prepared for that? Adrian signed his name without hesitation. As he finished the last signature, he looked down at the child now asleep in his arms, completely unaware of the storm he had stirred in one man's soul. I'll name you Noah, he whispered, pressing a kiss to the baby's forehead. Noah Calloway. And I promise you, I will never leave you alone, not ever. And just like that, a man who had saved hundreds of lives with his hands found himself changed by the life he held in them. The first week passed in a blur. Dr. Adrian Calloway, now officially a foster parent to baby Noah, juggled bottle feedings at 3 a.m., emergency calls from the hospital, and diaper disasters in the middle of charting patient notes. His once meticulously quiet home in Millbrook's North Elm district, a 2-story brick house with modern furniture, leather-bound medical journals lining the office shelves and spotless countertops, was now scattered with pacifiers, baby blankets, and the faint scent of formula in the air, and somehow, for the first time in years, it felt lived in, real. The living room echoed with soft lullabies and Noah's gentle gurgles. There were no visitors, no congratulations, just the sound of Adrian learning how to be a father in a town that wasn't ready to see him as one. By the end of the second week, word had spread. Millbrook was the kind of place where time moved slow and traditions moved slower. At Ruby's Diner, the heart of town gossip, the regulars didn't even pretend to whisper. Mrs. Collier, who taught English for 32 years at the local high school, leaned across her coffee cup, voice dripping with judgment. He brought home a colored baby, just walked right out the hospital with him like he's adopting a puppy. Across from her, Mr. Denton, the retired postmaster, shook his head slowly, fingers tapping his cup. Used to be we respected Adrian. Smart, clean, good hands. Now? He let the silence finish the sentence. And behind the counter, Ruby herself, who'd once bragged about Adrian saving her brother's life after a heart attack, muttered, "A man like that raising a black baby alone, he don't know what kind of trouble's coming." Back at the hospital, the shift was subtler but no less cold. Nurses who once laughed at his dry humor now answered him with clipped tones. Colleagues who used to ask for second opinions now avoided eye contact. It wasn't overt. It was a hum in the air, the way people paused when he walked into the lounge, the absence of invites, the sudden formality in every conversation. Dr. Kellen Price, his closest friend since residency, was the only one who didn't pull away completely. But even Kellen's concern came coated with hesitation. They sat one night in Adrian's den, Noah asleep in a portable bassinet nearby, a lullaby machine humming softly in the corner. Kellen leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gaze fixed on the half-empty glass of scotch in his hand. "I'm not here to judge, Adrian, you know that, but I've got to ask. Have you really thought this through?" Adrian didn't answer at first. He watched the fire flicker in the hearth, its orange glow dancing on the walls. His voice was quiet when it came. "Every night since I brought him home. And every night I land on the same truth. I couldn't leave him there." Kellen exhaled slowly. "It's not about what you can handle, it's about what he'll have to. This town, it's still the same place we grew up in. You know how it looks, how they talk. You can shield him from a lot, but not from that." Adrian turned to face his friend, eyes heavy with sleeplessness but sharp with conviction. "Then I'll teach him how to stand, how to be proud, how to walk into any room and know his worth, even when no one else does." The next day, Adrian visited his parents. The Calloways lived in a white colonial home on the west side of town. Classic shutters, manicured lawn, a front porch swing that hadn't moved since his childhood. Inside, the smell of lemon polish and roast chicken filled the air. His mother, Judith, fussed over the baby carrier, while his father, Raymond, sat stiffly at the dining table, fingers interlocked on the wood. When Adrian finally broke the silence, "His name is Noah, and he's mine." The weight dropped like a stone in water. Judith's lips pressed into a line as she set down a spoonful of mashed potatoes she hadn't touched. Raymond cleared his throat. "Adrian, son, I know you mean well, but this isn't just a baby. This is a statement, one this town won't forget." Adrian blinked, stunned. He's not a statement, Dad. He's a child, a human being left outside like trash, and his voice caught in his throat. I couldn't turn my back. Judith reached across the table, her hand trembling as it found his. We love you, Adrian. You know that. But you're bringing home a baby who will never be fully accepted here, and your career, your standing, you're risking everything. Felicity, his younger sister, spoke next from the far end of the table. And when you're in surgery at 2 a.m., when the hospital owns your life, who's watching him then? You think love's enough to cover the practical? Adrian stood, slow but steady, as Noah stirred in the carrier beside him. I'll figure it out. Other people do, maybe not in this town, but somewhere, somehow they do, and I will too, because I have to. Rainan's voice lowered. Son, people will talk. They already are. Adrian met his father's eyes across the room. Then let them. Let them talk. Let them whisper. But I won't let them make this boy grow up thinking he doesn't belong, not while I have breath in my body. He didn't stay for dessert. That night, as Adrian rocked Noah to sleep in the nursery, newly painted a soft slate blue with tiny glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, he whispered, I don't know what the road ahead looks like, kiddo, but I know this. You are wanted. You are loved. And I'll walk through hell if that's what it takes to raise you right. And outside, in the dark corners of Millbrook, the whispers continued, but inside that house, one man and one child sat at the beginning of something stronger than fear. A bond no judgment could break. The years passed faster than Adrian expected. One minute he was warming bottles at 3 a.m., the next he was tying shoelaces and packing lunchboxes, and now, somehow, Noah was 7, bright-eyed, curly-haired, and endlessly curious. He had his father's stubborn streak and a scientist's mind, always asking why and what if, until Adrian's answers ran dry. Their home, once sterile and still, now buzzed with laughter, dinosaur figurines on the coffee table, and drawings taped crooked on the fridge. But outside that door, the town of Millbrook hadn't changed nearly as fast. Noah's first year at Pine Grove Elementary started with hope. Adrian had dressed him in a checkered shirt and khakis, kissed his forehead, and snapped a picture on the front steps. Noah had been bouncing with excitement, his backpack nearly as big as he was. I'm going to make friends today, Dad, he'd said, grinning wide. And Adrian had believed him. But hope, it seemed, didn't last long in a town like Millbrook. By the third week of school, things had changed. Subtly at first, quiet lunches, no birthday invites, then cruelly, whispers in the hallways, a boy named Billy Thompson tripping him on the playground, a girl named Harper yelling that he didn't belong there. When Adrian asked Noah how school was, the boy shrugged and said, fine. But the light in his eyes dimmed more each day, and he stopped bringing home drawings. One afternoon, Adrian picked him up early and noticed a scrape across Noah's cheek. It was the slide, the boy said quietly, eyes fixed on the floor. Adrian didn't believe him. The final straw came on a Thursday. Adrian arrived home after a long shift to find Noah sitting on the stairs, his backpack abandoned, his knees pulled to his chest. I don't want to go back, he whispered, voice so small it nearly broke Adrian's heart in two. When pressed, Noah finally said, through tears and clenched fists, that the kids called him orphan, trash, and the mistake the doctor brought home. Adrian sat beside him, unable to speak at first because anger boiled behind his eyes, not just anger at the children, but at their parents, at the town that had let their silence become cruelty. The next day, Adrian met with Principal Hensley, a woman with a tight bun and a tighter expression. Her office smelled of old books and coffee. Dr. Calloway, she began, lacing her fingers together, we're aware there's been tension, but I think perhaps Noah is struggling to assimilate. He's different, and children notice that sort of thing. Adrian leaned forward, every word cutting like glass. He's not the one struggling, he's the one being targeted, and if you think being different justifies exclusion, then you're part of the problem. She blinked, surprised by his bluntness. I assure you, we're doing our best. Then your best isn't good enough. Adrian walked out of the office, knowing he'd made a few more enemies, but he didn't care. That evening, he sat Noah down at the kitchen table. "Tomorrow," he said, "we're skipping school, just you and me. A day to remind you of who you are, not who they say you are." Noah's eyes lit up for the first time in weeks. They drove to Brookhaven, 2 hours away. It was a bigger city, more diverse, more alive. Their first stop was the Natural Science Museum. Noah darted from exhibit to exhibit, face pressed against glass, soaking up every detail. He asked questions faster than Adrian could answer. At the dinosaur skeletons, he whispered, "Do you think they felt out of place too?" Adrian smiled, kneeling beside him. "Maybe, but look how they're remembered." At lunch, a woman in the restaurant smiled at them. "You two have a wonderful bond," she said, and for the first time, Noah didn't look surprised to hear it. As they walked through a public park later that afternoon, Adrian watched his son laugh with other children, build sandcastles, and chase bubbles without fear. The colors of the playground, the mixture of voices, the sheer normalcy. It felt like a different world. "There are so many kinds of families here," Noah said, spinning around. Adrian nodded, his heart heavy and proud at once. "Yes, and every one of them matters." That night, as they drove back to Millbrook, Noah slept in the passenger seat, his head leaning gently against the window, his hand still clutching a museum guide. Adrian kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting over Noah's backpack. The town lights came into view again, familiar, quiet, judging, but for the first time in weeks, Adrian didn't feel helpless. Because now he had seen what was possible. He had seen who Noah was when the world wasn't against him. And he knew the fight had just begun. It started with a fever. A small one, barely enough to notice, but enough for Adrian to keep Noah home from school just to be safe. By the end of the week, 3 other kids in Millbrook had come down with the same symptoms: low-grade fever, fatigue, no appetite. Then came the cough, then came the panic. Within 10 days, the pediatric ward at St. Haven Hospital was overflowing. Children from every corner of town, white, black, rich, poor, homeschooled and public, were arriving with near-identical symptoms, but none of the tests made sense. Adrien's calm, methodical world began to unravel, not just as a surgeon, but as a father. He stood in the ER one morning, a surgical mask around his neck and his phone buzzing constantly in his pocket. The halls smelled of disinfectant and fear. Nurses moved quickly between rooms, their faces pale and tight, the kind of tension Adrian hadn't seen since residency. Dr. Kellen Price rushed to meet him outside exam room 4. "It's spreading," Kellen said, breathless. 3 new admissions since you got here, all under 12. 1 in respiratory distress." Adrian's heart sank. He stepped into the room and saw a little girl no older than Noah, her skin clammy, her breathing shallow. Her mother sat hunched beside her, wringing her hands and whispering prayers under her breath. Adrian nodded to the nurse and stepped in, trying to push emotion out of his way, but it kept creeping back in. This wasn't just a medical crisis. This was his town, his neighbors, his son's classmates, and for once no one cared who had adopted who. They just wanted answers. Outside the room, chaos simmered. Parents packed into waiting areas, demanding updates. The hospital intercom buzzed with urgent calls for pediatric consults. It wasn't long before a familiar voice called out above the noise. "Mrs. Thompson!" Adrian turned and saw her clutching her son Billy's hand, the same boy who had once tripped Noah on the playground. Billy's face was pale and wet with sweat. "Dr. Calloway, please," she begged, tears already sliding down her cheek. I know what we said before, but please help him." Adrian hesitated just for a second, the memory of Noah's bruises flashing in his mind. But then he looked down at the child struggling to stand and remembered something he'd told Noah long ago. "You don't repay hate with hate. You meet it with truth." "Bring him in," Adrian said quietly. "We'll do everything we can." As the outbreak worsened, the CDC was contacted, but Millbrook was still too small to get priority response. It was up to Adrian and the local team. He locked himself in the hospital lab during off hours, poring over test results, tracking symptom patterns, drawing red circles on a whiteboard until the markers dried out. Every night he came home long after Noah had gone to bed, but Noah wasn't sleeping. One night, Adrian found him sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook open, flipping through pages of scribbles and diagrams. "What are you doing up?" Adrian asked, voice soft but ragged with exhaustion. Noah looked up, wide awake despite the hour. "I've been reading about how diseases spread." "Dad, what if it's not in the air? What if it's in the water?" Adrian blinked. "What do you mean?" "Well," Noah said, flipping to a hand-drawn map of Millbrook, "you said the symptoms started after the big rain 2 weeks ago, right? What if the water picked up something it wasn't supposed to? There's that plant that grows near the creek, remember? The one that makes me sneeze every spring? I looked it up. Wild glade vine. Its pollen can cause reactions. What if the roots, I don't know, leak something into the water?" Adrian stared at his son. The theory was wild, but it wasn't impossible. Not here, not now. Within 24 hours they had samples from 5 different creeks, collected with help from the county environmental office. They ran every test they could, and finally, something clicked. A toxin, organic, mild in adults but dangerous in children with developing immune systems, and it matched every symptom they'd seen. Adrian stood in the lab, staring at the report in his hands, his mouth dry, his knees weak. Noah had cracked it. Noah, the same boy no one wanted at their lunch table. Noah, the boy they said didn't belong. The next day, Adrian and Kellen developed a treatment plan using existing medication to bind and flush the toxin. Within 72 hours, children began to improve. Color returned to their cheeks, laughter returned to the ward, and slowly, fear turned into gratitude. The hospital phones didn't stop ringing. Parents wanted answers. Reporters called. But the one moment that stuck with Adrian came late one evening in the hallway outside ICU Room 3. Mr. Denton, the old postmaster, stood waiting. His granddaughter had just been discharged. He looked up at Adrian, hat in his hand, eyes glassy. "I misjudged you," he said simply, "and I misjudged your boy. I was wrong." Adrian didn't respond. He just nodded, because there were no words big enough for what that meant. Not in that hallway. Not yet. Back home, Noah waited at the table again, hands folded, eyes tired but proud. Adrian pulled him into a hug so tight neither of them spoke for a long time. "You saved this town," Adrian whispered into his hair. "You and your beautiful, brilliant brain." And outside their window, Millbrook sat quiet for once. Not in fear, but in awe. The summer sun rose gently over Millbrook, casting a golden haze across the rooftops, the church bell chiming in the distance as if trying to clear the last remnants of fear from the town's quiet streets. At St. Haven Hospital, the pediatric ward had returned to its usual rhythm. Band-aids, checkups, and soft-voiced lullabies instead of oxygen machines and frantic whispers. The illness had passed, the treatment worked. And though there were still questions, there was one truth no one in town could deny. It was Dr. Adrian Calloway and his son who had saved their children. The mayor called for a public gathering in the town square. Nothing fancy, just a way, she said, to honor the moment that brought us together. Adrian didn't want to go. He told himself it wasn't necessary. He didn't do it for recognition. But it was Noah who insisted. "We should go, Dad," he said quietly, adjusting the collar of his button-down shirt. "Not for them. For us." And Adrian, who had learned never to underestimate his son's wisdom, nodded. The town square was filled with folding chairs and murmurs. Colorful banners fluttered from lampposts, and a makeshift stage had been built in front of the old courthouse. Adrian and Noah stood near the back, unsure whether to step forward, until Mayor Trudy Hammond took the mic. She cleared her throat, her voice carrying over the hushed crowd. "Today isn't just about medicine," she said. "It's about humility, about change." Then she looked directly at them. "Please welcome Dr. Calloway and his son Noah." Adrian hesitated, but Noah gave him a gentle nudge. They walked together toward the front, the crowd parting slowly like a tide of silence and awe. When they stepped on stage, Adrian scanned the sea of faces. Parents whose children he'd treated, neighbors who once avoided him, and even those who had doubted his place in their world. And there, in the front row, was Mrs. Thompson, holding Billy's hand. She looked up with wet eyes and whispered, "Thank you, just that." But it was enough. Adrian stepped to the microphone, clearing his throat, uncertain where to begin. "I didn't come here for applause," he said slowly, his voice steady but low. "I came here because I love my son, and I couldn't sit by while the place he calls home turned its back on him." He looked down at Noah, then back at the crowd. "When we were hurting, we were alone, but when you were hurting, we showed up. Not because we forgot what was said, but because compassion isn't a transaction. It's a choice." The silence was thick until Noah stepped forward. He wasn't nervous, not anymore. "I'm just glad we could help," he said simply. "Even when it hurt, Dad taught me that we don't let pain turn us cold. We let it teach us." A few claps broke the stillness, then more. Soon the entire square was on its feet. People clapped, not just out of gratitude, but out of something deeper. Recognition. Something had changed in Millbrook, and they all felt it. In the weeks that followed, that change took root. The school board passed new anti-bullying policies. Diversity and inclusion workshops were introduced. Ruby's Diner, yes, even Ruby's, put up a sign that read, "Everyone welcome every day." Adrian was asked to join the town's new community health council. He agreed, but only if Noah could start a science club at school. "Deal," the mayor said, laughing through tears. At home, life was simpler again. Homework returned to the kitchen table. Dinner meant stories instead of stress. One evening, as they watched the sun set from the porch swing, Adrian looked over at Noah, now almost 12, taller, sharper, still curious. "You know," he said softly, "there was a time I thought we'd never really belong here." Noah didn't look away from the horizon. "We didn't," he said. "But now maybe we do, and if not, maybe we just made space for someone else who does." Years passed. Millbrook changed in small, steady ways, more open, more honest, still flawed but trying, and when Noah Calloway graduated high school at the top of his class and announced he would study medicine just like his father, the applause was thunderous. They never forgot the night Adrian found Noah wrapped in a blanket and left in the dark. But it wasn't just a beginning. It was a spark. A quiet act of love that grew loud enough to shake a whole town awake. And for the first time, Millbrook listened. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.